as the king and queen leave the thrones and head for the exit of Westminster Abbey on the coronation Saturday, you'll see that everyone bows and curtsies to the king, and no one moves a limb, a muscle, when Camilla passes. And that was because they were angry with Camilla.
Camilla never believed this day would come, not because she thought she was untouchable, because she believed Prince William would never dare to challenge her publicly, and she was equally certain Princess Anne would never force the issue into the open. She was wrong. Just minutes ago, behind closed doors at Windsor, William and Anne reportedly confirmed the one outcome Camilla had spent years making impossible. The royal status she believed was permanently protected had been stripped away. The privileges attached to it were being reviewed, and the circle of influence surrounding her was collapsing faster than anyone inside the palace expected. What shocked those present was not the decision itself, it was the evidence. Because according to sources close to the palace, the document placed before senior royals did not appear overnight. It was the final piece of a trail stretching back months, a trail of confidential meetings, disputed instructions, private complaints, and a growing belief among key members of the royal family that someone had begun quietly reshaping decisions that did not belong to them. William had seen enough. Anne had documented enough. And when the final memorandum landed on the table that morning, neither was willing to remain silent. Before we reveal the forgotten document that allegedly changed everything, answer this question. If you discovered someone was secretly influencing decisions about your family's future, would you stay quiet to keep the peace? Or would you expose it, no matter who got angry? Write quiet, or expose in the comments. Hi viewers, if you found proof that someone had been making major decisions behind your back for months, would you forgive them or confront them? Write forgive or confront below. The confrontation began before Camilla even entered the room. William was already seated. Anne was already waiting. The folder was already on the table, and for the first time in a very long time, the people inside Windsor were not asking whether Camilla had crossed a line. They were asking how long she had been crossing it without being stopped. A pen touched paper. Nobody in the room spoke. Not Prince William, not Princess Anne, not the legal advisors seated along the far side of the polished table, and certainly not Camilla. The document resting before the king had arrived less than 20 minutes earlier, carried into Windsor under sealed instructions and placed directly into William's hands. Whatever was written inside had drained the color from faces that rarely showed emotion in public.
I want to talk about the rehabilitation of Camilla as well, because of course we've seen this PR blitz, you know, one of her oldest friends, Lady Lansdowne, speaking out in public over the weekend saying there was never any sort of a plan for Camilla to become queen. And now Camilla's son, Tom Barker Bowles, has weighed in.
The atmosphere inside the room felt heavy, as though everyone present understood that once the next few minutes passed, there would be no return to the arrangement that had existed before. Yet the most shocking part was not the document itself. It was the fact that Anne had brought it. For weeks, rumors had swirled quietly through royal circles about confidential reviews, private consultations, and discussions that were never meant to leave palace walls. Most were dismissed as gossip. Palace staff had seen enough rumors come and go to know better than to react. But this was different, because Anne did not deal in rumors. She dealt in records. Before Anne reveals the document that allegedly triggered this extraordinary decision, anyone who believes Prince William and Princess Anne were right to finally draw a line should subscribe, like, and share this video right now. Because staying silent is exactly how powerful people continue getting away with things behind closed doors. Every like, every share, and every subscription sends a message that viewers are paying attention, and that the future of the monarchy should not be decided by influence operating in the shadows. If you believe William and Anne were right to stand up and protect what belongs to the next generation, this is the moment to show it. Do not watch quietly and then disappear. Stand with William and Anne. Hi viewers, if you had been sitting in that room and witnessed everything William and Anne had just uncovered, would you have stood beside them or stayed loyal to Camilla? Write William and Anne or Camilla in the comments. Inside Windsor, the silence finally broke when Anne opened a thick folder and placed it beside the king's document. She did not begin with accusations. She began with dates, one page, then another, then another. Each sheet represented a decision, an instruction, a meeting, or a communication that had passed through channels nobody had questioned at the time.
Not really, because she's still, our mother. I say speaking not the royal we, speaking for my sister and me. But she is she's our mother, and I think change happens, but I don't care what anyone says. This wasn't any sort of end game. She married the person she loved, and this is what happened.
Individually, none seemed explosive. Together, they painted something far more unsettling. William sat motionless as the pages accumulated across the table. His expression revealed nothing, but those who knew him best understood exactly what his silence meant. The Prince of Wales had already reached a conclusion. The meeting itself had not been called to discover the truth. It had been called because the truth had already been discovered. The real question was how far it reached. Across the room, Camilla remained composed, at least on the surface. Years inside royal life had taught her how to survive public storms, media attacks, and family disputes. She knew how to maintain control when others became emotional. But something about this meeting felt different. The usual balance of power was missing. No one was trying to calm tensions. No one was attempting to redirect the discussion. And perhaps most unusual of all, William and Anne appeared completely united. That alone was enough to unsettle seasoned palace observers. Because whenever those two stood together behind closed doors, it usually meant the matter involved something larger than family disagreements. It meant they believed the institution itself was at risk. The legal advisor seated nearest the king finally cleared his throat. A summary was read aloud. The words were measured, carefully chosen, almost clinical, yet every sentence carried consequences. According to documents now under review, several actions linked to palace operations had allegedly bypassed traditional channels and entered areas connected to future royal planning. Some involved appointments, others involved access, others involved authority. None of the claims had yet been publicly confirmed. Some remained disputed. Others were still under examination. But the accumulation of concerns had become impossible to ignore. As the advisor continued speaking, William's eyes never left the document before him. The room seemed to shrink around that single piece of paper, because everyone present understood something the public did not. The document was not a recommendation, it was a conclusion. And conclusions inside royal institutions are rarely reached overnight. They are built, quietly, patiently, piece by piece. Outside Windsor, reporters had already begun gathering beyond the gates. Most had no idea why. They knew only that senior figures had arrived unexpectedly. Vehicles had entered restricted areas. Schedules had changed. Staff movements had increased. Something significant was unfolding. The palace, as always, refused comment. Inside, however, the atmosphere was becoming increasingly difficult to contain. A second folder appeared, then a third. William finally turned a page. Anne watched carefully, not because she needed confirmation. She already knew what was written there. She had spent months ensuring every detail had been preserved. Every date, every message, every instruction, every unusual adjustment that had initially seemed too small to matter. Now those fragments sat together for the first time, and their combined weight was impossible to dismiss. Camilla broke the silence. She questioned the process, questioned the interpretation, questioned whether ordinary administrative decisions were being transformed into something larger than they actually were. Her voice remained calm, measured, controlled. But beneath the calm, tension was beginning to show, because the room was no longer debating isolated incidents. The room was examining a pattern, and patterns are far harder to explain away. The king remained silent. That silence worried several people more than any argument could have.
Diana was very gracious, and by this stage in her life, she would have found love and settled down, and I think she would have said, let them get on with it. She didn't bear a grudge, and I think she
would have been okay with Queen Camilla?
I'm not sure about Queen Camilla.
For decades, Charles had often stepped forward when situations threatened to become personal. This time, he simply listened. Page after page, record after record, until eventually even the advisors stopped speaking. The evidence sat before everyone, waiting. Then Anne reached into the folder one final time. What emerged was not a recent document. It was older, much older. The paper itself looked different. The formatting was different. Even the language belonged to another era. The moment it appeared, several people in the room visibly shifted in their seats because they recognized what it was: an archived memorandum, one connected to discussions that had taken place years earlier, discussions that many believed had long been settled. Anne placed the memorandum directly in front of William. Then she spoke only a single sentence. The sentence changed everything. According to sources close to the fictionalized account being examined here, Anne allegedly informed those present that the memorandum contained guidance written long before the current dispute began. Guidance that anticipated precisely the kind of conflict now unfolding. For the first time since the meeting started, William's composure appeared to crack, only slightly, but enough. He stared at the final page, then looked toward Anne, then back toward the document. Because hidden near the bottom of that memorandum was a passage that nobody expected to see. A passage suggesting that years before any of the recent controversy, someone inside royal circles had already warned that a future struggle over influence could emerge. And beside that warning was a handwritten notation. A notation bearing initials that immediately changed the direction of the entire meeting. The room went silent once more. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Because if those initials meant what Anne believed they meant, then the story everyone thought they understood was about to become something very different. And for the first time that morning, even William appeared uncertain about what would come next. A heavy mahogany door snapped shut in the quiet corridors of St. James's Palace, cutting off a conversation that was never supposed to be heard. Inside the small, windowless office, a junior archivist stood with hands trembling over an open filing cabinet. 3 minutes earlier, an unannounced courier had entered under authority of a restricted clearance code, removed a single crimson folder, and vanished into the private stairwells. No signature was logged, no digital record was updated. When Princess Anne walked into the room moments later, her gaze shifted instantly to the empty space on the second shelf, where 70 years of constitutional precedent usually sat undisturbed. She did not ask the archivist what had happened. She did not raise her voice or demand an immediate explanation. Instead, she stepped forward, pulled out a pocket notebook bound in dark leather, and meticulously wrote down the exact time, the missing reference number, and the identity of the staff member who had logged into the room 30 minutes prior. The investigation did not begin with dramatic confrontations or public statements. It began with quiet, almost invisible pattern shifts that only someone who had spent 5 decades watching palace mechanics could possibly detect. 3 months before the emergency meeting at Windsor, the routine of the royal household had begun to subtly fracture. Schedules that had remained unchanged for generations were suddenly being modified late at night. Patronages were quietly moved between administrative departments. Personnel who had served decades in specific constitutional roles were unexpectedly reassigned to distant estate management tasks, replaced by new advisors whose loyalty belonged to a different wing of the institution. To an outsider, it looked like routine modernizing. To a casual observer, it was simple administrative housekeeping meant to make a large organization more efficient. Even Prince William, juggling his own heavy burden of public duties and family responsibilities, initially dismissed the early warning signs as mere bureaucratic noise. When minor disputes over ceremonial precedents arose during planning meetings, he encouraged patience. When trusted advisors voiced subtle concerns about unusual access requests, he counseled against jumping to conclusions. He believed the system would regulate itself, as it always had. Princess Anne knew better. She understood that in an institution built entirely on tradition, protocol, and precedent, small shifts are never accidental. Power inside a monarchy is rarely seized in a single aggressive moment. It is acquired millimeter by millimeter, document by document, signature by signature, until one day the balance has fundamentally altered and no one can pinpoint the exact moment the shift became permanent. Working late into the night at Bagshot Park and Gatcombe, Anne began constructing a parallel ledger. Every cancelled briefing, every redirected memo, every altered seating arrangement at state events was logged with cold mathematical precision. She interviewed former private secretaries who had quietly resigned. She examined security logs for private entrances. She tracked the movement of internal briefings that seemed to bypass traditional channels entirely. The picture that emerged was not one of administrative oversight. It was an organized, deliberate attempt to widen authority, secure future influence, and rewrite procedural boundaries before the next reign even began. If you are listening to this right now and you claim to respect the memory of Queen Elizabeth and the future of the monarchy, but you choose to turn a blind eye while calculating figures quietly manipulate the core of the royal family from behind closed doors, then your loyalty is nothing more than cheap lip service. If you actually care about truth and integrity over quiet manipulation, write "Protect the Crown" in the comments right now, or prove that you are completely comfortable watching the institution be gutted from the inside out.
It's been sold to us, hasn't it? I mean, from quite a meteoric rise, from the most hated woman in Britain to Duchess of Cornwall, to Princess Consort, to Queen Consort, to Queen. My goodness, there are big steps to climb. I think this is Charles's doing. I don't think it's Camilla's.
The silent friction soon spread to staff levels, creating an atmosphere of deep paranoia throughout Buckingham Palace. Senior aides who had worked together for decades began closing their doors during routine phone calls. Whispers in the corridors dried up the moment a colleague approached. Certain briefing packets meant for William's desk were arriving late, missing key attachments, or containing subtle edits that altered the tone of constitutional advice. When Anne finally presented her early findings to William during a private walk on the grounds of Windsor, the initial reaction was one of stunned disbelief. William had trusted that despite personal differences, everyone involved shared a basic commitment to the stability of the crown. Listening to Anne lay out the timeline of unauthorized changes, he realized that his patience had been mistaken for weakness, and his desire to keep family peace had been weaponized against the very future he was born to protect. The situation moved from quiet concern to active threat when Anne discovered that historical files regarding ceremonial distinctions were being systematically re-examined by outside legal consultants without the knowledge of the constitutional advisors. Someone was actively searching for legal loopholes, looking for ways to cement temporary privileges into permanent rights that could not be revoked by a future monarch. The deeper Anne dug, the clearer it became that the ultimate goal was far larger than mere administrative influence. It was an attempt to lock in authority, secure funding streams, and retain key ceremonial distinctions that were historically reserved only for direct lineage. William's attitude hardened completely. The patient heir vanished, replaced by a strategic protector who understood that his future reign was being systematically undermined before it had even begun. Together, they established a strict protocol for documenting every future interaction, securing sensitive historical files, and restricting access to core constitutional briefings. Yet, despite their vigilance, they were running out of time. The legal reviews were accelerating, key decisions were being pushed toward the King's desk for rapid approval, and the window to intervene without causing a catastrophic public scandal was rapidly closing. Then, the final spark ignited. Late on a Tuesday evening, Anne made an unexpected visit to the Central Royal Archives housed in the Round Tower at Windsor Castle. She requested a specific crimson ledger containing sovereign directives from the early 1990s. The vault door swung open, heavy and cold. The archivist on duty turned pale as he pulled the designated tray from the shelf. The compartment was empty. A file containing key constitutional guidance written during one of the most volatile periods in modern royal history had vanished completely from a secured royal vault, leaving behind only a blank checkout card with an unauthorized signature that changed everything. A heavy wooden desk drawer in the basement office of Clarence House was forced open with a sharp, echoing snap. Princess Anne did not wait for permission. She did not ask for keys. Standing in the dim glow of a single desk lamp, she pulled a set of worn, leather-bound folders out into the air, blowing away a thin layer of grey dust. Beside her, Prince William leaned over the desk, his jaw set tightly as he shone a flashlight over pages of audited account sheets, private banking statements, and long-forgotten royal warrants. The missing archive file had not left the palace grounds at all. It had been secretly moved under cover of darkness, buried beneath stacks of routine maintenance invoices and routine estate receipts, hidden where no standard audit would ever think to look. For 3 straight hours, the air in the cramped room grew cold and heavy as they systematically turned page after page. What began as a simple administrative trail quickly morphed into a shocking web of unexplained financial allocations. Small sums, initially looking like routine operational costs, had been regularly siphoned into private accounts created to fund independent legal reviews. Hundreds of thousands of pounds had been spent on external constitutional opinion papers, commissioned in total secrecy without the knowledge of the sovereign or the Prime Minister's office. Every line item told a chilling story of quietly expanded influence. Money allocated for charitable foundations had been redirected toward private legal teams tasked with drafting new definitions for royal privileges. Schedules detailing historical land rights, ceremonial stipends, and residential privileges were covered in handwritten margins, making clear that an aggressive effort was underway to convert temporary favors into permanent legal entitlements. William ran his hand over his face, staring at a set of signed authorizations that clearly bypassed standard Treasury oversight. The psychological weight of what sat before him was suffocating. This was no longer rumor or palace gossip circulating among disloyal aides. This was black and white evidence of an internal power grab happening under his father's roof. As they dug deeper into the bottom tier of the folder, they uncovered a yellowed, red ribbon-bound document bearing the personal seal of Queen Elizabeth II, dated just months before her passing. The room fell dead quiet. The late monarch, renowned for her ironclad discipline and strict adherence to constitutional boundaries, had left explicit instructions regarding the management of honorary distinctions and ceremonial titles. Her written words were blunt and uncompromising. She had clearly outlined the exact limits of authority granted to senior family members, establishing firm guards to prevent any individual from overstepping their designated role. Queen Elizabeth had recognized the delicate balance required to keep the monarchy stable. She knew that trust in the institution relied entirely on selfless service, not personal ambition. Seeing those precise, familiar signatures overridden by recent secret administrative edits sent a surge of quiet fury through William. It became undeniably clear that the legacy his grandmother had spent 70 years protecting was being systematically eroded from within. Every decision Queen Elizabeth had made was now being treated as a negotiable guideline rather than a sacred sovereign directive. The quiet dignity of her reign was being replaced by a covert struggle for status and power, orchestrated by figures who believed the passage of time would erase the old rules. If you are watching this and you claim to honor the memory and legacy of Queen Elizabeth II, yet you sit there silently allowing ambitious figures to trample over her final constitutional directives, then your loyalty to the late Queen is completely fake. If you actually possess the moral courage to stand up for her memory and demand that her original boundaries be defended at all costs, protect her legacy in the comments right now, or admit to yourself that you simply do not care about honor, duty, or truth. The atmosphere inside the room turned increasingly claustrophobic as William and Anne cross-referenced the late Queen's directives against recent policy changes. Every single modification made over the past 18 months directly contradicted the sovereign instructions laid out in that red-ribboned file. Specific privileges that Queen Elizabeth had explicitly restricted had been quietly reinstated. Public positions that were meant to lapse upon her passing had been covertly extended. Access to state papers, high-level diplomatic briefings, and crown property management decisions had been granted to individuals who possessed no constitutional right to see them. William stood up, pacing the narrow space between the dusty metal shelves. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. He had spent years maintaining a public front of family unity, enduring intense media scrutiny and personal sacrifice, all while believing that everyone involved was working toward the same shared goal. Now he was looking at undeniable evidence that while he was out carrying the public weight of the monarchy, others were sitting in darkened offices, altering the very structure of his future reign. The reality was sickening. The people trusted to maintain stability were actively preparing a framework that would strip the future king of his rightful authority before he even took the throne. Anne remained seated at the desk, her expression stoic, her eyes cold and calculating. She pulled out a fresh red pen and began mapping out a detailed timeline, connecting each covert financial transaction directly to a corresponding policy change. The pattern was undeniable. It was a methodical, step-by-step campaign designed to secure total independence, massive financial guarantees, and permanent ceremonial standing. Disputed claims and palace rumors that had circulated for months were no longer abstract stories. They were backed by paper trails, timestamps, and unauthorized signatures. The truth was far more calculated than even the harshest critics had speculated. As the clock on the wall ticked toward 4 in the morning, Anne reached the very last section of the hidden file. Tucked inside a sealed glassine envelope was a set of confidential legal opinions drafted by senior constitutional experts. She sliced the top of the envelope open with a small silver letter opener. William stepped closer, leaning over her shoulder as she unfolded the heavy paper. The text was dense, written in formal legal terminology, but its ultimate meaning was unmistakably clear. The document did not merely outline administrative recommendations or suggest routine updates. It went far beyond anything they had anticipated. High-level constitutional legal advisors had formally evaluated the validity of the honorary distinctions, ceremonial titles, and public privileges currently held by Camilla. They had examined every historical precedent, every royal warrant, and every administrative modification made since the marriage took place. Their conclusion was a devastating blow. The confidential document stated unequivocally that several major honorary titles and high-status ceremonial distinctions granted to Camilla lacked proper legal foundation. It explicitly warned that these elevated privileges had been assigned through administrative shortcuts rather than valid sovereign decrees, rendering her current honorary status open to immediate legal challenge and formal revocation. William and Anne stared at the page in total shock. The missing file contained the exact legal mechanism required to completely strip away those privileges, setting the stage for a dramatic showdown that would rock the monarchy to its very foundation. A heavy silver teacup slammed into its matching saucer, shattering the fragile china across the polished oak floor of the Buckingham Palace drawing room. The sound echoed through the high-ceilinged chamber like a gunshot. Camilla stood near the tall, grand windows, her face flushed red with uncharacteristic rage as she stared directly across the room at Princess Anne. Beside her, King Charles sat in a high-backed leather armchair, his hands gripping the carved wooden arms so tightly that his knuckles turned pale. Outside, dark storm clouds hung over London, but the real tempest was raging inside this locked, heavily guarded room. The confrontation had officially begun. Standing side by side near the main doorway, Prince William and Princess Anne presented an unyielding front. The room felt stifling, charged with decades of suppressed tension, unaddressed grievances, and family rivalries that had finally boiled over into an existential constitutional crisis. Two senior legal advisors sat quietly at a small side table, opening leather briefcases and laying out stacks of white documents, certified bank transfers, and internal palace memos. There was no polite small talk. There were no traditional royal formalities. The mask of public harmony was completely torn away, exposing the raw, brutal fight for power underneath. Anne stepped forward first, her voice cold, steady, and entirely devoid of warmth. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She began reading directly from her chronological ledger, laying out every single unauthorized action taken over the preceding 18 months with surgical precision. She detailed how private advisors had quietly altered access protocols, how financial resources meant for institutional maintenance had been redirected to fund private legal consultancies, and how sovereign directives left by Queen Elizabeth II had been deliberately ignored. Each statement was accompanied by the slide of a printed paper across the central table, building an undeniable mountain of physical evidence. Camilla fought back instantly. Abandoning her usual calm demeanor, she sharply questioned the validity of the investigation, branding the entire effort a paranoid, malicious crusade designed to undermine her standing. She insisted that every decision made under her authority was intended solely to modernize a bureaucratic institution, streamline operations, and support the king during a challenging period of his reign. She accused Anne of harboring ancient grudges and accused William of allowing personal distrust to cloud his judgment. Her arguments were passionate, calculated, and aimed directly at Charles, appealing to his desire for peace, stability, and loyalty within his immediate home. If you are watching this right now and you choose to stay silent, making excuses for calculated greed while a sacred legacy is torn apart from within, then you are actively helping destroy the very foundation of the institution. If you actually have the self-respect and backbone to stand up against hidden manipulation and demand absolute truth, type "expose the truth" in the comments right now, or admit to yourself that you are totally fine with deceit as long as it wears a royal badge. The emotional weight in the room shifted dramatically when Prince William finally stepped up to the table. He did not engage in shouting or dramatic emotional outbursts. Instead, he placed his flat palm directly onto the center of the legal files, his deep voice cutting through the rising arguments like a razor. William made it terrifyingly clear that this was not a petty family disagreement over status or social standing. This was an active, documented threat to the constitutional integrity of the crown and the future stability of his own upcoming reign. He looked his father directly in the eyes and detailed how secret legal opinions had been commissioned behind the sovereign's back to grant Camilla permanent ceremonial authority that exceeded constitutional boundaries. The psychological toll on King Charles was visible to everyone in the room. The monarch sat trapped between two opposing forces, torn between personal affection for his wife and his sacred, lifelong oath to protect the crown above all personal feelings. His face grew pale as he listened to the precise dates, timestamps, and financial amounts being read into the record. Every attempt by Camilla's legal team to dismiss the findings as mere palace speculation or administrative misunderstanding crumbled under the relentless weight of the paper trail. The evidence was simply too thorough, too carefully documented, and far too dangerous to ignore. Anne laid out the timeline of secret meetings held with outside lawyers, pointing directly to signatures that authorized high-level access without the required clearance from constitutional advisors. She proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that an intentional effort had been made to bypass traditional crown protocols, creating an independent pocket of influence that answered to no traditional authority. The tension reached a suffocating peak when William opened the final leather-bound folder he had brought from the archives. He pulled out the confidential legal analysis, evaluating the validity of Camilla's elevated ceremonial status. The legal advisors seated at the side table confirmed the findings in low, grave tones. They admitted under direct questioning that the administrative modifications made to elevate her status possessed serious legal flaws, leaving those distinctions highly vulnerable to immediate public challenge and formal nullification. Camilla grew strikingly pale, realizing for the first time that the web of influence she had spent years building was collapsing in a matter of minutes. The authority she believed was permanent was suddenly hanging by a thread, exposed as an unauthorized administrative maneuver that lacked proper constitutional backing. The silence that followed was suffocating. William took the final formal document, a binding legal recommendation outlining the immediate restriction of her ceremonial authority and the total removal of disputed honorary titles. He walked slowly across the heavy oriental rug, stopping directly in front of the monarch. Without saying a single word, Prince William extended his arm and handed the final recommendation directly to King Charles, forcing the sovereign to make an ultimate choice that would alter the history of the royal institution forever. A fountain pen hovered over the cream-colored parchment, its golden nib trembling slightly in the stark morning light of the Windsor library. King Charles did not sign immediately. He stared at the binding legal recommendation sitting on the blotter, his eyes tracing the blunt black ink of the executive order that would effectively strip Camilla of her disputed ceremonial distinctions and dismantle her expanded administrative apparatus. Across the room, Camilla stood completely motionless, her eyes fixed on the king, waiting for an intervention or a gesture of defiance that never came. Beside the grand fireplace, Prince William and Princess Anne stood shoulder to shoulder, their silent presence an overwhelming reminder of the oath that bound them all to the institution above personal ties. The nib-touched paper, the heavy scratch of black ink signing the decree echoed through the vaulted room like a gavel striking wood. It was over. With a single signature, the monarch validated the comprehensive findings presented by his son and sister. The administrative loopholes were closed instantly. The unauthorized legal consultancies were terminated with immediate effect. High-level access to Crown property directives, sovereign briefings, and restricted treasury channels was formally revoked. The disputed honorary titles and elevated ceremonial privileges that had caused months of secret division within palace corridors were officially stripped away, reduced to mere historical footnotes in the royal records. Camilla turned without uttering a word, leaving the library with a small retinue of shaken aides. The air inside the room remained thick with emotional fallout, but the power dynamic had fundamentally shifted forever. Within hours, the internal consequences rippled rapidly through the palace infrastructure. Key advisors who had quietly managed the unauthorized expansion of influence were quietly relieved of their duties, their security passes deactivated before nightfall. Office spaces were cleared out under strict oversight. Confidential files were impounded and returned to the permanent royal archives under armed military escort. To the outside world, nothing seemed to change. The royal flag still flew above Buckingham Palace, guards stood at attention, and official schedules continued uninterrupted. But, behind the scenes, the internal victory belonged entirely to William and Anne. They had drawn a firm line in the sand, protecting the core of the future reign from covert erosion and restoring strict constitutional boundaries before permanent damage could be done. If you are sitting there watching this video right now, and you plan to simply scroll away without taking a stand, then you are part of the reason hidden manipulation thrives in the shadows. If you actually possess the basic moral integrity to defend, honor, and support William and Anne in their fearless fight to protect the crown, type "Stand with William" in the comments right now, or admit that you are completely fine watching the monarchy crumble under secret ambition. The palace fallout was swift, calculated, and absolute. Staff who had spent months navigating the toxic atmosphere of divided loyalties were forced to adapt to a new reality where accountability was enforced without exception. Rumors and speculative accounts of high-level arguments were kept strictly contained within internal walls, framed publicly as routine modernizations designed to streamline the royal household for a changing era. Yet, despite the overwhelming victory and the restoration of institutional order, the story was far from complete. As the evening light faded over the Windsor grounds, Prince William and Princess Anne returned to the secluded archive room beneath the round tower. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind them as they sat down to catalogue the remaining documents recovered during the night investigation. Anne opened a worn leather binder that had been recovered from the very bottom of the missing archive drawer. Tucked inside a sealed watermarked sleeve was a yellow document that had remained untouched for over 3 decades. It was a confidential memorandum drafted years before the current dispute ever began. The document bore the official seal of the Sovereign Office and contained explicit instructions outlining the exact scenario that had just unfolded at Windsor. It detailed a step-by-step mechanism designed specifically to remove unauthorized royal distinctions if a senior figure ever overreached their authority. William unfolded the paper, reading the precise, chilling legal language that had anticipated this exact power struggle long before anyone in the room had even realized what was coming. Hidden at the bottom of the final page, written in sharp, unmistakable handwriting, was a final warning note. The note explicitly named the exact individual who had first uncovered the initial plot years ago and laid down secret instructions on how to defeat it when the time came. That confidential memorandum contained a hidden name that changes everything we thought we knew about the late Queen Elizabeth, Prince Philip, and the real reason this fight began. You cannot afford to miss our very next upload, where we finally expose the secret identity of the late royal figure who wrote that warning and reveal the final hidden directive that is set to shatter the palace once again.